This week's episode of This Is Only a Test is made possible by the fine folks at Indeed Prime. Tech talent, are you tired of sending endless resumes ready for companies to apply to you? Well, on Indeed Prime, one free application gets you in front of thousands of companies like WP Engine and PayPal. And everyone gets one-on-one access to career coaches to help seal the deal. Whether you're hiring or looking, meet your match on Indeed Prime. Join now at indeedprime.com/test. Again, that's indeedprime.com/test.
Hey, let's start the show.
For Thursday, July 4th, Happy Independence Day, Americans. Welcome to This Is Only a Test, the official podcast of Tested.com. USA. Well, I know there are a lot of you out there who are international-based listeners, not USA-based ones, but this week I think we can be especially USA proud because, one, it's July 4th, Independence Day, but also Women's World Cup, Team USA.
Yeah, so I don't really actually follow football at all, but I do when the U.S. crushes countries that do care about football. There's nothing that makes me quite happier than seeing our mother country kind of suck it when it comes to soccer.
I mean, they had a 13-colony lead, and they blew it.
Yeah, I mean, they had video review to their advantage. They were trying to cheat their way to victory. They even had a penalty kick.
And we even had one of our star players not play, sit out the entire game.
I mean, we tried, England. We really tried.
We tried to let you have a fair game, but it's the 11th game winning streak. Congratulations to Team USA for making it to the World Cup finals.
My favorite comment was from a bunch of British folks on Twitter talking about Alex Morgan's celebration when she was sipping tea after a goal as being classless. And I'm like, that is exactly how Americans celebrate sports at all times. Like, we are not, classy does not ever describe it.
I mean, in American football, if we're going to go back to a different sport, celebrations after touchdowns are kind of controversial, and the league had to kind of set some guidelines as to what can and can't be done after a celebration. Is that the same for international football, for soccer? No,
they celebrate all the time,
yeah,
and it's all rehearsed.
And yeah, everyone has their. It's like this is the original like a video game dance, right? Like the shortcut key. You press your shortcut key for celebration dance.
It's IRL emotes, yes.
That's exactly it. Thank you for setting me straight. Yeah, IRL emotes. Well, we'll all be watching this Sunday, we believe. USA versus who's the other?
We don't know. The match is. We're recording this on Wednesday, and the match hasn't happened yet.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kishore, for being in. It's a duo cast. If you didn't realize already, Jeremy is out this week already, getting into the July 4th festivities. So maybe he'll be back next week. But Kishore, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I feel like it's been a while again.
Yeah. Last week.
Is this episode 1,000? Where are we at?
No, I think we're at 50. I don't know. 506, 505, 507. I don't know. It doesn't really matter until we hit 1,000. Yeah. But the past week, all right? You were gone? Yeah, you were gone last week. Oh, you missed some excitement. We had Gunther on. And you know what? We got some positive responses to Gunther's appearance.
I listened to the episode. Gunther was dropping some like straight econ 201. I mean, I don't know what the economics class on Bitcoin is, but he started to jargon it up too.
And you know what? That's a fraction of the depth he will go into. You know, our lunches when we go out with him, and when he and Jeremy go deep into crypto, he had to pull it back a little bit. And I'd love to know if we'd like for him to go deeper, or if we'd like to have him back at all, because, well, Bitcoin has stabilized a little bit.
It's stabilized. So like mid-show, it crashed, right?
It did. It crashed, and it turns out, we're going to jump a little bit ahead. I was going to make this our top story this week, but I guess we can talk about something else for a top story. But it turns out that Coinbase, which is a very popular exchange for Bitcoin, went down for a little while. It was like half an hour or something, 17 minutes. Went down while we were recording, and that was responsible for the 2,000-point crash in Bitcoin. And since then, we're going to give a shout out to Bitcoin today, because every time we do it, I guess that's when Bitcoin fluctuates. But in the past week, it has kind of stabilized at between 10 and 12,000. So still pretty good compared to a week and a half ago when it was kind of floating about 8. And I ask Gunther every day, like, what does this mean? And he goes, he's not going to give any predictions because this is very, very short-term fluctuation. It could go down to 6,000. It could jump up to 15,000. Who knows?
You're looking for the wrong indicators. You're talking to Gunther. I'm looking at what Gunther comes into the office with. If he's in like a new ride, I'm like, oh no, Bitcoin has really risen.
If you've got extra cream cheese on the bagel this morning, then we know he must be feeling pretty good about that crypto. Yeah. So we also, a little bit of housekeeping. Last week we put out a request for you out there, listeners, to make suggestions for the name of a reoccurring segment on cryptocurrency, on Bitcoin, if one you want it. It sounds like people wanted it. We didn't get any musical submissions. Not yet. And maybe the best thing to do is in the future, I'm going to have Gunther come in here and just shout out some phrases, right? Shout out some hodls and shout out some stuff. Some BitConnect, so you can have some sound bites to make.
What were the names suggested?
So we had some pretty good names.
Tales from the Crypto?
Oh, you gave away my best one. That's the favorite one.
That came up last week, though.
Oh, did that come up last week?
Yeah, I think somebody said it on the podcast.
Was he on the show 2 weeks ago then? No. No.
Somebody said that. I didn't just make that up.
That one, I think, I completely lost track of time. That one did come over Twitter, and that one is my favorite one so far. Tales from the Crypto. Yeah.
Sorry to steal your thunder.
No, that's all right.
Was there other ones that were good?
The Miner's Minute. What was one that I liked? Coin Flip.
Coin Flip. Oh, yeah. Interesting. Tales from the Crypto is I think just that's clear winner. Though.
That's the best one.
It's like a little Black Mirror-y.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get on to our top story.
Story this week.
All right. So, our big story is, sudden announcement of the departure of Jony Ive.
Jony Ive not alive anymore.
Yeah.
I told you I was going to make a short circuit reference in this week's episode. I got it in there. No. Had to happen. I've been waiting how many ever years I've been on this podcast to get short circuit references going.
No disassemble. Well, it's Jony Ive, not Jimmy Iovine. You got two J.I.s there. Jimmy Iovine I think he's being phased out of Apple. He's less involved now. But Jony Ive, chief designer, I don't know what his title was.
He's guy just Jony Ive.
Head of design, been there for 10 plus years, since before Steve Jobs came back, right? So this is like multiple decades that he's been at Apple, but really responsible for the entire Apple hardware design language. Every product you see coming out of Apple, he's had a hand in today. And, we'll talk about the news and we'll talk about how that came about, but I think it's worth spending some time giving a little bit of a retrospective on his time at Apple, kind of like the importance of his impact, some of his greatest hits, some of our favorite products that he designed, and why that stuff is important. Because contextually, I think we all know iPhones, know iPads, know about the Apple Watch, but not a lot of people think about the PowerBook, the G4, but we'll get to that. So earlier this week. Actually, what was the date of this? That the announcement?
It was like Friday of last week.
Friday.
It was like one of those try to sneak it in.
Yeah, and there was this whole press release. Jony Ive he's only 51. He's not retiring at all, but he is leaving Apple to start his own design company, Love From,
which I think is already in existence. Right? Had he already kind of started it and started staffing with it? before this was announced?
I'm sure he's been. I mean, what's the bigger news, right? Jony Ive leaving Apple or Kevin Durant leaving the Golden State Warriors? It's regardless. It's something that's been on their minds forever.
It's Jony Ive.
Yeah, and I think it's Jony Ive, of course. So it feels like he's had his one foot out the door for a long time. You've seen less of him at the Apple announcement events. The only appearance you really see is, in these design videos, the product videos where he does the voiceover. But really, that's it. And yeah, of course, you see him like at the events in the demo areas, the hands-on areas. There's always those photos of him showing the products to reporters or talking to Tim Cook. But really, he hasn't been very public facing in terms of his involvement. That last big profile and the last time we saw a lot of Jony Ive in the public was with the launch of the Apple Watch. That was just like 3-4 years ago now. And when he was how proud he was when he did all those watch bands, talk about the collaboration with one of his design friends, the new Apple Store tables that the watches hide under. And I think there was a New Yorker profile where he talked, like, it really strongly hinted at him being very interested in designing a car. And Phil Schiller has talked about the name of the 10R and the 10S, and how those names are very tied to car naming. So like obviously the executive team and the head honchos over at Apple are also big car nuts, but there is no Apple car, right? So maybe Jony Ive wanted to leave to flex his design muscles on something that's not just a rectangular piece of milled aluminum with glass on it.
I think this has been in the works for a long time. This wasn't like we got into a tiff, Tim Cook and I, last week, and it's like, well, it's time.
We'll talk about the Wall Street Journal story.
But I think this has been like I think what you point to is the more likely story. There's been sort of a slow, steady kind of arc that's been leading to this point, because we aren't seeing him front and center in everything. Certainly not in the way when Jobs was still at Apple that we'd see Jony Ive much more.
Well, and famously, he and Steve Jobs had a wonderful working relationship. Like, he was one of the very few people that Steve Jobs would give all the credit to in terms of the design. Like, they really went hand in hand in terms of their philosophy and how they thought about product and user experience. But his role went up, right? So, Jony Ive, in the past couple of years, not only was the head of their industrial design and the physical idea of products, but also technically he was in charge of the UX as well, all the software side. After Scott Forstall, quote unquote, left / was pushed out, who knows, Jony Ive was put in charge of all of design, and that was a huge responsibility. Now, we're not going to pretend that no one else was also managing that, right?
No, maybe there's hundreds of people.
Yeah, exactly, right? There's that it is not the hierarchy is not flat, right?
No, let us not lead into this lone genius idea.
No. But this also marks kind of a departure finally from that. And people have astutely pointed out that Apple, previous to the past couple of years, never really made their designers known. They never put the names out of their designers. But in like the New Yorker profile, I think Ben Thompson wrote a piece about how in the New Yorker profile, they started seeding, some of these names of designers. And when they made the announcement that Jony Ive is leaving, they did say that, he would be replaced by, specific designers, although reporting to an operating person, operations person.
I guess Jony Ive had multiple roles, as you said, and we haven't even discussed the role he had in the building, in their new headquarters.
Oh yes, that was his last big product, right? For Apple was the spaceship.
And so, when you have somebody operating in those multiple roles, there's no title for that person. They're just doing all these different things. So you're not going to replace them with one person either. And so it kind of makes sense that this replacement for, some of the official titles is probably going to fit in a bunch of different spots. I'm not sort of surprised by that.
Yeah, organizationally, they have no, executive VP of design anymore, right? People are going to report to Tim Cook. It all falls under the chief operating officer, Jeff Williams. But they did say that hardware design and industrial design and human interface design, all the software stuff, will be two different leads. You're going to have Evans Henke will be VP of Industrial Design, and Alan Dye will be the Vice President of Human Interface Design. So at least you're going to have separate people on the that people can point to as being responsible for these things. And I'm sure they have been heavily involved, for a long time. And I'm sure that even as Jony Ive is leaving, even if he was not to have any more involvement in Apple, which is not going to be the case because Apple is the first big customer for his new design firm, but they have products in the works that he's had a hand in that we won't see for years. Right,
a decade, I'm sure.
I can't imagine that Apple would let him go without him having some huge design input on whatever AR glasses, for example. Like if you're talking about design being an important thing for something, a category that has not been proven yet to be consumer friendly, AR would be chief among them. You kind of need the confidence of a Jony design, for lack of a better phrase, the reality distortion field that he brings to it as well.
If there's one product or one sort of design aesthetic that you feel like is going to have the biggest legacy in terms of his work.
Oh, God. So then this begs going back a little bit of the history, right? Mm-hmm. So let's set up some context. Before 2001, that was when the first iMac came out. And this was, Steve Jobs came back to Apple in the late 90s with the next acquisition. Apple had iconic products before, right? The original that Jony Ive had no involvement with, right?
I mean, you've heard us talk about the Newton all day long here.
I mean, the Newton ahead of its time, right? Maybe,
yeah.
But the original Macintosh, right? And even on the software side, Hello, with their Paint application, right? That is an iconic piece of computer hardware that was highly desirable, that had all these both technical and kind of ineffable qualities that you would associate with a coveted piece of technology, a desirable piece of technology. But then, if you were to ask someone, what did an Apple computer look like in the mid-90s? I think most people would be hard-pressed to describe what a Macintosh looked like in the mid-90s, because it was kind of like...
Still probably reference the Apple IIe, even though it was 10 years after that came out.
Yeah. And in the 90s, the Apples, they were kind of like your IBM PCs. They were beige boxes, rectangular boxes with a monitor that sit on top of it, and they weren't really distinct. So while we might think of like the iPhone or maybe even the Apple Watch as some of the things that today we are most connected with in terms of the Jony Ive's influence, it really was the iMac, that translucent, candy-colored plastic computer that had a CRT built in, that had no floppy drive, but had a CD-ROM drive, right? That was a revolution in computer design.
Yeah, I know it was a later iteration, but when it really hit me how big of a deal this was is when the color iMacs surfaced, all the multiple colors.
You remember those ads, right?
I remember the ads.
The circle rainbow of all these different fruit colors, and they were computers I saw in schools, like computer labs. We used to have computer labs in schools, kids. People didn't just bring their laptops and and iPads and Chromebooks to the class. There were designated rooms in our middle schools for computers. But it was a sea change when computer labs started getting filled with these iMacs. It was the cool place to be.
And they weren't the beige box anymore.
Yeah.
As soon as it started to translate to like furniture element in your home, that you could start to think about, this is a thing that is not just a piece of utility. It's a piece to that should have beauty and artistic representation in it, like a lot of things started changing. And I'm sure the iMac wasn't the first computer to really do that, but it was the first one to do it at a mass market appeal, which naturally bled into what came next.
Well, after that, you also had, and of course the candy-coated plastic stuff that also bled into the laptop side. You had, what was it? It was before MacBook. It wasn't the PowerBook, but what was that laptop that Apple had that was also kind of like the candy-coated shell?
Yeah, I don't remember the name.
Well, separate from that was the PowerBook G4. And the PowerBook G4, they had the titanium one, but that was the big change in, I think, that set the tone for Apple's design today. And that's, you see it in the iPad, you see it definitely in the MacBooks, you see even some of it in the Apple Watch, but that all metal laptop, which was also a complete revolution in terms of how you would make a computer, in terms of the materials used, in terms of the fabrication, how expensive it would be to make a laptop out of metal, in terms of designing something that would have these design constraints. It couldn't be modular in a certain way. It would need to fit within this volume, which would get smaller and smaller over time as they went from the PowerBooks and the MacBooks to the MacBook Airs. That was a huge design change, and also due to Jony Ive.
I think he probably doesn't get enough credit for accelerating some of the developments that probably had to happen in material science and processing, because he's notoriously had that high bar and he kept pushing the envelope. And we see that reflected in every phone, not just the iPhones and the iPads now. We see that reflected in like the glass. We see it reflected in like the shells that we see on these, not just the interface. And I think that's not in small part due to the bar that he set for the field.
Yeah, iBook is what I was thinking of. That was the weird clamshell plastic laptop. And then you think about it. So in the 2000s, you had, you had so many products. You had the PowerBook, you had the iMac, iBook. Then of course you talk about on the desktop side, they had their the Mac Pros. Then the iPod, right? iPod also 2001. And iPod was obviously so revolutionary, but one of the things that's striking about the iPod was how many different designs it went through. Both the iPod Mini, the iPod Nano, the iPod Shuffle, right? The iPod itself, that when we talk about the iPod, meaning the iPod Classic, the thing that was constrained by the storage medium, right? Mm-hmm. It was that form factor because they found, I think it was Toshiba, who made a hard drive that was smaller than 2.5 inches, that fit in this form factor, 1,000 songs in your pocket, and had that white plastic design. But the iPod, every year, it would have a new design that was iconic. You had the first iPod. The second iPod had the touch button wheel. Third iPod, the four dots button. Do you remember those four buttons? And then the iPod 5th gen, which was...
Didn't that get color?
Sorry. There was an iPod color screen. Mm-hmm. And then the one that was the aluminum one. That was the one that released, I believe, in 2005. The first one I bought, which had the touch wheel, right? That was huge, right? And also could play video and had the kind of milled aluminum back as well. iPod Mini, which was massive, right, in terms of its success. And that iPod Mini, that kind of curved side aluminum design, you see that ID in products today. You kind of see it still in like the iPhone, the iPod Mini. You definitely see it in like remote controls and like that type of like flat curved side with the flat top and bottom. The Nano, oh my God, the Nano went through like 4 or 5 designs, right? That first Nano, which like was had all the very glossy front that was very easily scratchable surface. To the Nano went to tall screen, went to nothing but a screen. Basically, the Apple Watch was a Nano at some point. My point is that in the first half of the 2000s, before 2007, design must have been super fun for Jony Ive and his team.
It was probably just Wild Westy. I don't know if like fun is the right.
Well, I mean, for a designer,
term.
right? Like the ability for every year to revamp this device and people go crazy about it and really have that push it. That's in huge contrast to today, where the iPhone 6, 7, 8 were essentially the same design. The 10 and the 10S, same design. And all indications are that, whatever Apple is going to put out at the end of this year is essentially going to be in the same form factor as the 10, 10S, and 10R, but maybe with like a different camera array system in the back. It's not nearly as exciting because all the advancements are now under the glass. Literally, it's the display that's under the glass. It's the processor, and it's the software.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get jaded and cynical because of how rapid some of the early advancements are in a product cycle in terms of the outer shell.
Oh no, I'm not saying jaded in terms of consumer standpoint. I think the consumer should be happy with whatever is coming out, and I think it's completely unrealistic to expect the type of iteration that we saw 10 years ago. 18, 19 years ago now. But as a design perspective, like where does he find his outlet? I think that probably led to a lot of the decision to want to. I mean, you talked about the things that he's designed outside of Apple. He's designed like Christmas displays, like mall
toilet.
Yeah, right. The Jony Ive, right? Like he just wants to flex these muscles. He wants to design a chair. I bet. I'm sure he has chair designs he wants to get out there.
I'm sure. I'm not surprised at the departure. He's been there almost 30 years. Let's talk about the rumors of why. There is a Wall Street Journal report that said Tim Cook was not valuing design as an important part of the product development process, which struck me as being kind of a overly bold statement. And I think Tim Cook himself took it that way because then he wrote an email directly to the writer and editor, basically completely rebutting the story.
Yeah, this is very
that was not
uncharacteristic.
That was not a PR person went through this email and like crafted it for it. No, this was like he wrote this email. It looked like.
Well, he didn't write it to Wall Street Journal. He wrote it to CNBC.
Oh, okay.
And so,
but still, he wrote this writer. Email.
He did, right? And it was I'm sure it was it passed through PR and all
sure,
that.
but it wasn't like
it was
that
strongly worded.
Yeah,
like this report from the Wall Street Journal does not reflect reality. And hope you're doing well. And then immediately got into it. But Wall Street Journal stands by the reporting, and even if it's not true, the specifics of the wording, that how, it's pretty bold. The claims that Wall Street Journal story had about Tim Cook being disinterested in product, and which led to wild speculation, like, oh, so Tim Cook's first time seeing these products was at these events. Of course, I don't think that's the case at all. I do think as a CEO, he's got to have his hand, and he's got to be, but I'm sure that by comparison to Steve Jobs, undoubtedly Steve Jobs is a more product-oriented person.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. And Apple is a completely different company now than it was in 2005, in 2001, even in 2007. The products they're making now and the type of, like, the feats required to manufacture, design a product, get it into production, and have it reach the hands of hundreds of millions of people. 1 million people buy an iPhone every 2 days. That's insane. Like,
is it really that much?
I think it's close to that. Yeah, I think it's like at launch.
At launch, okay.
Yeah. Maybe even more than that at launch. But regardless, on average, over quarters, that is not. I mean, the CEO can't just be a product person or can't just be an operations person, right? So I can see all the reasons why. I do think it makes sense, and I think The Verge had a story that made a very good point that it is about time that we stop thinking of these companies as being run by one person or needing the magic touch of one person. Yes, I think a vision does need to be had, and they shouldn't just be making random products, and there needs to be some type of cohesion, but that's not through the grand vision necessarily of just it's one person doesn't make or break that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the most likely explanation is what you said earlier, that he probably got bored. And also designing that building was probably a taxing process, let's just say. And it hasn't been terribly well received.
Really?
In the context of how it fits in the larger urban landscape, which is sort of like the bigger conversation that's happening, is like, where does this fit? It is totally disconnected from the world around it. It literally is a spaceship that landed on the ground.
I think that's just a manifestation, the architectural manifestation of how insular Apple is, and the secrecy like that.
Yeah, but so that's weird.
It's not an Apple store, right? It's not meant for public interaction.
I guess so, but buildings are part of the urban landscape, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, the point of it is, it makes more sense to me that he wants to flex and do other things. The one issue that I have, or wondering I have for the future, is Jony, I think, always pushed them more towards looking at some of their product lines as accessories, as fashion products as well.
That's also what the Wall Street Journal said. It made the assertion that he was disappointed that the watch was marketed less as a fashion accessory and more as a piece of technology, even though they clearly launched it as a high-end fashion accessory with those Apple edition watches that reportedly did not sell very well, and there are thousands left unsold, and with all these very expensive watch bands, right, inviting celebrities to wear the watches, and they do wear the watches, and it has sold well. But I do think, fashion technology, he definitely is more into the fashion side.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Apple move farther away from that with his departure. They are already moving away from that. There was a time when having an iPhone was like a status symbol, and it's less of that now than it was. And it could be just because it's just so much more common.
AirPods are the status symbol. I mean, Apple still has a firm grasp on that. Their Beats acquisition, I think, was totally a play at being relevant. But that's a different type of status. That's status less in design and status more by celebrity association and marketing. But high fashion, I do think, I agree. High fashion, they are going to take a step further back on that. I don't think there's no way they can launch, and I might eat my words, but I don't think they're going to launch their AR glasses, if they do, as a high fashion the way they did their Apple Watches. It's definitely going to be more about utility and experience.
That'd be amazing if you have to get a 2-hour fitting session.
Hermes Apple AR.
It could happen.
Which partner? Oakley? No, they wouldn't do Oakley.
No, not Oakley.
Yeah, you're not going to go to your sunglasses.
It's going to be like Ferrari edition, stuff like that, something way bizarre.
Yeah. The other big question I have is, who are his other clients? And will he be able to talk about his other clients in that way, right? If another big technology company, is there a non-compete with this? I can't presume there is, but if, let's say even in the tech world, not at Microsoft, they have their own design people, but if like a boutique tech firm, right, a Chinese tech company, or even if a company as big as like an LG wanted to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at Love From, one, can they get the business? Two, if they got the business, would they be able to say it?
I mean,
where will we see Jony Ive's design muscles flex next in the consumer space?
I would think for a guy that can kind of pick and choose his spots at this point, why would you get back in
I don't think he
consumer
will.
electronics,
But
right?
I'm curious, is like, is it going to be consumer facing or is it going to be more installation based? Like, is he going to design, buildings? Is he going to design?
I would love to see him take on public spaces. Like, what would he do with a public space? It could be really weird and awful, but I don't know what to expect.
I don't think it's going to be awful. Here's why I think he won't design a public space. It's because it's going to be not controlled by... you can't control how the public use it, like an Apple store. I think he's going to be too precious about that. Why would he design a public square where people can graffiti and kind of loiter?
What about an airport or something like bizarre like that?
Something with I definitely think something with prestige. I think he's the type of person who definitely wants to make an impact, and airport I could definitely see, an airport, something maintained. Oh, I'm so curious.
That's where it would be so interesting to see him flex, because like if some company is like, hey, do my electronics device, it's just not interesting. I think more likely he'll end up in like some furniture thing or something like that, some home use.
His contemporaries, right, have designed boutique products that when they Mark Newsom, when they go to the public, they are ridiculously expensive. Like, I think Mark Newsom has that hourglass that's like, instead of sand, it's like these perfectly milled little beads that flow down. Like, we're talking about products that are tens of thousands of dollars, outside of the reach of a consumer. And I wonder also if the design constraints of needing to make a product that sells, even though admittedly for a very high price of like $400 or $1,000, if that's not the realm he wants to work in. If he wants to only, design boutique products that you can only make 100 of, or that there's only so much of this material, because he's a materials guy too, right?
He's going to start working with uranium because it's a precious resource.
Yeah. Asteroid mining, right? Get me some iridium, or get me some graphite from the stars.
All right, we've probably been a little too long in the tooth about Jony Ive, but congratulations on your retirement from Apple, at least.
He got away. So, Kishore, presumably you were not here last week because you were watching Endgame? Not enough times.
That isn't why I wasn't here last week. And yes, I watched Endgame twice.
You watched it twice? Wow.
I watched it two more times.
Really did your part. Holy smokes. Okay, so Endgame re-released in theaters. I think we did talk last week about the news that it would not be a ton of footage. And I also went to see it again in theaters. I contributed to the $6 million made in the U.S. The update is that it is now still
$23 million short, and it's
globally,
not going to make it.
It's not. There's no way it's going to make it. That, in the grand scheme of things, when it already has made $2.7 billion, $23 million doesn't sound like a lot, but it's also 2 months after release.
It only made $6 million this weekend. So,
$6 million U.S., and they're not going to get another push this week with Spider-Man Homecoming.
Almost everything is in the U.S. right now.
Yeah.
In terms of its gross.
So if the only chance it really has to beat Avatar is if they do another re-release, a celebratory like anniversary release or some big thing, maybe for an Oscar push. Watch Endgame in theaters before it gets to get that Academy Award consideration.
RDJ is going to get like a supporting actor push or something like that.
No, I don't think he's the best actor in that.
I don't think so either. But
I think everyone does extremely well. But I don't think. Honestly, I think Nebula does a great job in that.
RDJ was good.
He was good.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I'm trying to think.
So is Chris Evans.
Yeah.
So is Scarlett Johansson. So is Paul Rudd. I think they're all pretty good.
No, Paul Rudd was just playing Paul Rudd.
Regardless, if you're thinking about seeing Endgame in theaters, we can now confirm the extra footage. As expected, there was
don't go see Endgame to see the extra footage. Is what I have to say.
Yeah, they are literally DVD extras. Like you have tags at the end of they come at the end of the credits. Almost, it's not a post-credit scene. Like it says Marvel Studios, and then you have here are some DVD extras that we're putting in the theater for you. There is a wonderful tribute to Stan Lee and Stan Lee's cameos. In that, and some never before seen footage of him as he was shooting those cameos. So that was very lovely to see. The actual deleted scene itself, completely understand why that was cut from the film. It was like paced wrong. It's a DVD extra in that you don't see all the full final CG elements. A lot of stuff looks previs. There's a nice cameo. Actually ties back into a joke. I won't spoil it, but ties back into a joke that's made in the film. But
unnecessary.
Completely unnecessary. And I was surprised this was one of their favorite deleted scenes. Like I would have thought they would have put something a little more meaningful into there. And then even the little teaser that was put in for Spider-Man Far From Home, kind of blah.
Yeah, I didn't understand why they need it. Like, first of all, I don't think they need, like, unless, like, I'm misreading something, the Spider-Man movie is going to go crush things.
It's made $39 million already Tuesday night.
So,
right?
like,
it's going to destroy the box office.
I don't understand what the teaser thing was about.
Yeah. I don't think people were there to watch Endgame again, not realizing they could buy Spider-Man tickets. And even if they did, this little preview was not enticing enough to get them.
You know what would have done well? If Endgame did one of those like Fathom Events things where they had a round table with like the cast or something afterwards as like a one night only, as a way to mimic what we saw in the funeral scene, which is how do we close out this saga, this era of the MCU with Kevin Feige in the middle talking to everyone.
I was going to say akin to what we saw with the DS9 documentary.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? Where it's just like a little bit of a making of podcast almost. The problem is that would then require you watch a 3-hour, 2-minute movie and then sit for another 20 minutes.
Yeah, but if they did it as like a one night only thing, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, I could play like a little spoiler class. Right?
That's how you get over the line.
Oh, no, you can't. I'm wondering if they release Endgame with the commentary track, right? Yeah. Like it's the directors and the actors talking over the movie for 3 hours in theaters. Would that count for Endgame's box office total, or would that be counted as a separate entity in itself? I don't know exactly how this stuff.
You want to hear the most amazing fact about this? My wife only saw Endgame for the first time this past weekend.
Wow, she's the one.
She held out.
She's the one who, did she like it?
We got halfway into our conversation about it, and I was like, okay, you didn't love this movie enough for me to sustain this conversation with you.
All right, well, that's our Endgame update for the week. I doubt we'll have any more Endgame updates unless some big revelation happens, but now we're just kind of waiting for home release. In other movie news, now the Flash film, DCEU.
Hey, need this?
DCEU's been on quite a streak lately.
Streak?
Yeah, Aquaman did very well, $1 billion at the box office. I thought it was a totally fun film. I enjoyed it. Wonder Woman, great film. We also had Shazam, which I totally enjoyed. And I dug the hell out of. That's coming out, I think, on
some
digital.
Major problems with that film.
Oh, you know what? I take it back. I'm going to say one more thing about Endgame. While Endgame in theaters reinforced the fact that between the portal scene and Mjolnir was probably the most euphoric moment in this year in theaters, I will stand by that Shazam had the most joyful moment in theaters this year. More so than Endgame. No one was happy in Endgame. The ending, the big third act surprise was the most joyful moment. That put a bigger grin on my face almost, that Mjolnir was like, oh my God, holy hell moment, tears on my face, but joyful tears for Shazam. They nailed that third act. My only regret for the end of Shazam is I thought they needed a better post-credit stinger. And
I don't even remember what it was. I remember. Mind. Yeah,
they needed The Rock. They needed Dwayne there.
But a Flash movie.
So this has kind of been in a strange place because Ezra Miller, who was booked to, he did the Flash in Justice League and cameo in Batman v Superman. He had been tied to do a Flash film, a standalone Flash film. They had a director, and then they kind of changed directions, and there was a whole report about how Ezra Miller had an attempt to write the story himself in order to keep the role. But
yeah, it was with Grant Morrison too.
Yeah,
he tried to write it, so he got out heavy hitters to rewrite this thing.
But that DC or Warner Brothers wanted to move away from his take on the character, which I thought was a disappointment because I love his take on the character. I think he's a wonderful actor. But it turns out that now they have another director, maybe another new director. This being the director of
It,
the part 2. That's right. And Ezra Miller might be staying for that now.
So this concerns me. Help me understand this. So if you're bringing in a horror director, a good horror director, into The Flash, which is kind of a goofy character, are we getting darker Flash?
Which is what Ezra Miller wanted.
How are we doing darker Flash, though? I mean, there's only one dark
Flash
story.
The
maybe
Flash's
two.
Story, his life is kind of like, there's a lot of tragedy.
But he's not, typically he hasn't been a very dark, brooding character.
No, it's true. Reverse Flash is pretty dark. There's a lot of time travel stuff they could do.
I was thinking Flashpoint Paradox is where...
That's too ambitious. That's too much multiverse building that they're not ready for.
That's right. But that's where the darkness, I think, actually is. So I'm like, this is the first Flash movie. It should be kind of light and fun and goofy.
Also, the other thing is the Flash exists on television right now. We talk about multiverses, right? The Flash on CW is very lighthearted, and that fulfills that niche. And I don't necessarily think that, Barry Allen, criminologist, forensic analyst, Barry Allen plays well on big screen. There's got to be something cool that makes use of Speed Force.
But at the same time, what has worked for Aquaman? Big goofy film.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman had like heart to it, but also it looks like Wonder Woman 1984 is going to be big, bright, kind of probably have a lot of callbacks to the 80s. I think that's what works. What didn't work? Arguing about Martha in the middle of Batman v Superman.
Totally. And the Flash backstory in Justice League, the little that they showed, was kind of in angst as well. Him, trying to redeem his father and solve that crime. I'm wondering what is the overarching theme of a Flash movie? What is the thesis, right? What's the thing what's the big takeaway, the big lesson, right? Fastest man alive. But what does that mean? Why is that significant from a thematic perspective?
And I understand it if they do time travel, because then they'll bring in the moral of you can't really change your past.
I think it's a good point. As fast as you can move, time never stands still. Right? You can't stop the passage of time. There are things that you cannot be in all places at once. When you think of all the Flash conundrums in the comics, it's I've planted 10 bombs in the city, and he can kind of, as fast as he can run, as much places he still can't be everywhere at once. That's kind of the burden, right? He's expected to be because of how fast he can be, but he thinks as fast as a human, and bad things will happen. Maybe you have something like that.
I remain skeptical, but all the people involved in this project seem to be the right people. So
yeah, and he's just a fun actor. I think he's going to bring a lot of fun to whatever role and however they portray it. He was the comic relief in Justice League, and so I'd like to see more of Ezra Miller as the Flash.
Speaking of a different direction for an established director.
That's right. Well, is it really? Is it though?
Maybe.
No, I think it's a return to form. Maybe not.
Okay.
Well, I'll take it back, because that was under assumption that he was out of form for Last Jedi, which I don't think at all. I think it's more of a return to his roots. Let's call it that. Because Rian Johnson's new film, Knives Out, first trailer is out, and this looks like rollicking fun.
Yeah, I love it. It's a whodunit.
which is very in vogue right now. Like you have Murder on the Orient Express. You have the huge success of the Netflix Adam Sandler murder mystery Jennifer Aniston film. I actually watched that.
Was it all right?
Well, the reason I watched it was fine.
You can just say autoplay.
It's autoplay. But the reason I watched it was because they had taken inspiration from the Thin Man story.
Oh,
which is the relationship, the husband-wife murder mystery solving couple, and I love the Thin Man series.
I enjoy the spit out of whodunits if you don't take them too seriously.
Yeah, and this is very much in the vein of like Clue. In a building, lots of characters. There is a murder mystery to be solved. A patriarch dies. You have all these characters. You have Chris Evans. Talk about something a portrayal that maybe a return to his roots, but definitely. To his Johnny Storm days, or
a little Scott Pilgrim.
Yes. This is a role that the Scott Pilgrim version actor and Chris Evans would take. Kind of a little bit of a jerk, but it looks stylistically looks awesome. And I say it's a return to his roots because it reminds me so much of Brothers Bloom. Which is my favorite of his films. Yeah. So, Knives Out. Can't wait for that to come out. The other thing, so we got some Gaiman news.
Gaiman is the hottest commodity right now. All of a sudden,
did you see the tweet he retweeted where a fan said that was watching Good Omens and thought that Neil Gaiman was like a 18th century writer? it was like an Oscar Wilde type writer, and no, it's just he writes that way. He writes with such interesting prose and delightful characters that it just doesn't seem of the day. And the first piece of news is that he has announced that Sandman he's involved, and it's going to happen as a TV series, not a movie. Sandman has gone through more like near happens than almost any other comic franchise. I can't believe it. Watchmen came out before Sandman.
Yeah, I think like just a year or two after Sandman came out, there were already rumors that it was going to be adapted. First of all, happy it's going to TV.
Well, Netflix.
Well, whatever, same thing.
Yeah.
Actually, even better than Netflix. David Goyer, who wrote the Batman Dark Knight.
David Goyer is a coin toss. David Goyer...
I'm a little higher on David Goyer than Norm, but still.
Have you seen his directorial debut, Blade 3, Trinity?
I have seen that movie. I did not realize that was him.
That's David Goyer. But he is capable. But Neil Gaiman, who kind of like cut his teeth doing the Good Omens. I'm glad he did Good Omens, which is fantastic. But Sandman is, I think, more near and dear to more of Neil Gaiman's fans' hearts than Good Omens. Now he has all the experience, and he can do this right.
This is a don't fuck this up kind of show, though. This is like one of those that people are going to be freaking out about in the biggest way, and they're going to put so much pressure. You thought pressure on Star Wars and like Lord of the Rings was intense. The hardcore concentrated fans of Sandman who've never seen this adapted are going to be all over this project.
It's already stirred controversy. So Neil Gaiman and David Goyer are EPing it. It's actually a show run by Alan Heinberg, who worked on Wonder Woman and Grey's Anatomy, but whatever. He's also capable. 11-episode series, which I think sounds about right, especially since this is probably a season 1 order. Sandman, the stories, I can't imagine they end with, spoilers, death of Morpheus at the end of this. I do think that it's going to be kind of the volume 1 of Sandman, the Morpheus collecting his, reconstituting his powers.
Yeah, that would move too fast.
Re-exploring the world. But it's already been stated, Neil has already said that it's going to be set in modern day. So it's not set in the 80s when Sandman was set. So not a period piece, set 30 years later. But it's going to be still Morpheus the Sandman story. It's just, I think Sandman is everlasting. I think Sandman does not necessarily need to be in the 80s, even though the aesthetic style of that Kelly Jones art was so much in that kind of like thin man.
As long as they don't change like the nature of like the the actual interactions between characters. And like,
And
I
you're
can't
gonna
remember.
get him going through time. You're gonna get. I mean, Good Omens was such a perfect example of this. There's a episode in Good Omens that's not in the book, and it's the most Sandman thing ever. I don't know if you've seen the series, but it's the two angels like and their relationship through time. That is a freaking Sandman story, right? Sandman. There's the great bet he does with Sister Death about what happens if he takes death away from one man and lets him live forever and becomes Sandman's friend. They kind of meet together every 100 years. Like that is so Neil Gaiman. And so even though it's not set in the 80s, you're gonna get Midsummer Night's Dream. You're gonna get the Shakespeare stuff. You're gonna get him in the trench coat today. You're gonna get the brothers and sisters, the siblings, right? And who's gonna play Death? That's the big question.
Oh, the casting of this is going to be so all over the place.
Yeah.
You're going to have to work overtime to get the Norm's perfect casting machine going.
I know. Already, gears are already turning. I know a lot of people. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I thought could have been a really cool Morpheus. They're not going to get Keanu Reeves, even though.
No, he's too old now, isn't he?
Is he, though? Will he ever be?
Why don't we just cast Robert Pattinson and make people mad?
Some people have speculated for Death, Kristen Ritter.
Oh, yeah. She showed a lot of range when she shifted over to Jessica Jones from who I'd known her to be.
Ellen Page is already tied in with Umbrella Academy, but I could have also seen her do Death. I got to think about this. But we're going to move on to our next bit of Neil Gaiman news, and this is a little more obscure, but for comic book fans, something that was very cool. It's not happening, but Neil Gaiman said that he had pitched to Marvel TV, the idea of doing a 1602 series. Now, what is 1602? Well, it was a mini-series that was one of these big events in Marvel Comics, about maybe more than 10 years ago now. But it was the Marvel Universe, but almost like an Elseworlds, DC Elseworlds story, but set in the year 1602 in the New World, set in America, where you had familiar characters like Doctor Strange and Iron Man and the Hulk, but kind of in this almost Outlander era world.
It was like very Elizabethan.
Totally. And the big twist was that it was actually canon. I will spoil how.
So it kind of like what struck me as interesting is you can imagine like Wolverine in that time.
Well,
and
mutants,
like it
mutants
totally mutants in that time totally rings. And so I don't know if that feels like if we're actually doing this feels like the jumping the shark moment for Marvel television.
This is better if Marvel did like what DC does with their animated films, right? This would be a great animated movie.
Yes.
Special, 2-part special.
I agree with that.
And also, it's the kind of thing where the twist does not work because it only works because the characters are done with artist interpretation. If you know what I mean. Right? Once you put actors in there, the story plot points are kind of given away. Yeah. But a really cool idea, and one of those things that like was totally like Neil Gaiman diving into superhero comics in his own way. Yeah. Speaking of other highly anticipated TV shows, we got some Picard news.
Yes, give it to me. Feed it to my veins. That trailer is the best trailer I saw all year.
Picard's going to have a big panel at Comic-Con this year, all CBS All Access with the Discovery stuff and the Picard stuff. But Michael Chabon apparently is running the show.
Yeah, and so this is not a huge departure in the sense that he was already working on the writing team for it.
Yeah.
And apparently this was a promote from within kind of situation where he's crafted a lot of the direction that's really hit home, and some of the writing that's taken over. So this was sort of a natural progression as it's been reported. Awesome.
The other thing that makes this really awesome is that they're really thinking, it sounds like they're thinking of this as a one complete story, and 10 chapters in a complete story. This is a book.
Awesome.
This is like the fan fiction. When I used to buy those 400-page Star Trek books about what life would be like after TNG, like this is that, but put on screen.
I mean, what's going to be hard about this is there's got to be like a Picard suffering kind of element to this.
I think it starts off with the suffering.
Yeah,
the whole idea, the whole
sure.
the
So I
teaser
think that's what's going to be hard for the fans. You just have to start preparing yourself because that's also what Michael writes well, is that kind of arc. So just be prepared.
Yeah, highly serialized. It's not going to be lesson of the week, villain of the week, alien of the week type thing. It's going to be one man's journey and revisiting this character. And, they've said they're open, if this does well, to maybe not having it be the end. Well, I'm happy if it's the end.
I mean, it's just like Patrick Stewart's old.
Yeah. Well, he also doesn't really age. I mean, he's vibrant. Last bits before we move on, because we have gone pretty long. Stranger Things, of course, debuts this week. Probably by the time you listen to this, it will have aired. Reviews have been great. So I'm very excited to watch Stranger Things. And then it's a little bit of an announcement. We talked about this on Still Untitled, but Adam announced a Project Egress. We have a lot of science talk, so we'll put this in pop culture. But Adam is going to be at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum the week of Comic-Con, the week of July 16th. And on the 18th, I believe that's a Friday the 18th, he, along with Jen Schachter and even some familiar tested faces, will be at the National Air and Space Museum assembling their replica of the Apollo 11 command module hatch. I've seen bits and pieces of some of the work that's been put in. Ryan Agata, Sean, and Kate, they've all contributed pieces. Microsoft Harvard Lab is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the shell and the display, and it's going to look so cool.
For anyone that's seen the Apollo 11 capsule, you'll note how much texture and richness that hatch has. It had a lot of utility on it, but it is like a mess. Like when you look at it en masse. So I'm really excited to see how they kind of fit all of this together. And this goes right to Jen Schachter's strength. Like, she helped design at the first NomCon, like them building this whole like collaborative piece from different maker spaces around the country. So this is right in her wheelhouse. I can't wait to see what she creates with it.
Awesome. All right, that does it for Pop Culture. All right, we do have some tech. It end up not being a heavy tech news, but here's some computer vision stuff. 2 computer vision stories to kick things off. Google Lens. You use Google Lens? Word Lens, when they kind of built into their camera app. I
mostly use it for the translate feature.
Yeah,
especially when I go to restaurants that have some different languages on them.
I feel like both Apple and Google are taking these interesting like soft paths to AR. Right. Neither have glasses yet. We don't count Google Glass as AR, but kind of hedging their bets. Like, is AR going to be holding a phone out to the world like this, or is it going to be something wearable? Well, if it ends up being wearable, the holding the phone out to this, so the camera facing the world, is a crucial part of that. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's ARKit, there's AR Core, but on the Google side, you've had that kind of AR functionality be in practical use with Maps and with Google Lens in translating. And now Google Lens has another feature. It's actually only in San Francisco, but taking the knowledge graph of the things, not just keywords, but also visual data, and recognizing things like artwork and street art and in the city, and giving you that contextual info. So as you're walking through the streets, lifting your phone up for whatever purpose of navigation, you can also get some interesting information about art.
I love this idea in the context of a museum. I can't wait for a museum to do this, because you think about something that has been stale for a long time. It's the audio tours at art galleries.
Well. Minus the Louvre, when you can have a Nintendo DS.
Oh, come on. Well, I mean, that's the Louvre, first of all. But I think that's ripe for some additional information and overlays. And oftentimes you're seeing stuff where it's like, look at this corner of the of this sculpture or whatever. You might as well have the overlay for it and still be able to appreciate what's happening. I can't wait for more features like this to come out.
Yeah. And on the Apple side, this is a piece of computer vision that's not world-facing. This is one of my, things that annoy me. I'm going to do a tangential things that annoy me, because this is front-facing camera. Yes, I get that. Rear-facing camera. No. There's no such. Why do you call it a rear-facing camera?
So what do you want to call it?
It's
camera?
a world-facing camera.
World-facing camera. That's weird too. That's
front-facing camera because it faces not the front of the phone.
I
it
understand
faces your front. You, the user's front. Rear-facing camera makes it sound like you're pointing at butts.
No, that is not what I think about at all.
But that's what it sounds like. The rear-facing camera. Now, I understand it's on the rear face of the phone, so it's not the rear-facing camera. You can call it the rear face camera.
So you're a problem with the hyphen or the rear?
The hyphen, the rear-facing camera, which, well, first of all, people who type it don't even use the hyphen because grammar on the internet, that's a whole other thing. But technically, it's the world-facing camera. Or the rear camera. I accept rear camera because then you're talking about the rear of the phone, the back of the phone, or the world-facing camera. Rear-facing camera, not acceptable.
I'm not going to agree with you on this one because you have three different complaints all kind of coalesce into
and they're
one.
all valid. They're all valid. Let's stop saying rear-facing camera. You say rear camera or I'll say world-facing camera because you have your front-facing camera and the world-facing camera.
I would argue just for camera because you're already calling the other one the front-facing camera.
Yeah. I'm happy with that. Happy with camera as well. Happy with that. Well, this piece of computer vision news, if you want to bounce back up, is more about the front-facing camera, and this is kind of a feature that if no one reported on it, I think people would just have accepted, but now it might become a thing. So iOS 13 is in beta. And it's coming out in a couple months or so, later this summer. But now FaceTime on iOS 13, FaceTime on your phone has on the new phones at least on the 10 or 10s they have the IR dot array, right? It can do mapping of your face and also eye contact. It needs the eye contact actually to when you look at that camera for it to activate. It's actually just bouncing IR light right into the back of your retinas, and when it gets that reflection, that's how you know you're looking at it. It's actually a quite simple piece of technology using the fact that light bounces right to the back of your eyes, your visual cortex, and back out. But the problem is that when most people use FaceTime, when they're using video conferencing, they're not looking at the camera. I've noticed this myself. I actually, when I do a Skype call on my laptop, one, I don't like. It's weird to look at people's faces on a computer and just stare at them because you don't really. It's not the same as looking at someone in person. So I actually look at the camera intentionally, like the camera on my laptop, and kind of off my peripheral, I can still see when the person stopped talking and not talking, but I just train my brain to look at the camera. Especially when I'm doing a video podcast with someone over Skype, I never look at the Skype window. I look at the camera.
Okay.
It's a personal quirk. This is just something I do. But I won't have to do that on FaceTime anymore because with iOS 13, Apple will build in auto gaze correction.
So it's going to somehow shift the
It's going to manipulate the video to shift your eyes to look up.
That's so creepy.
Into the actual camera as opposed to into the video screen. And do it just seamlessly. Just have it in the background.
I so want to see a demo of this.
There's some screenshots of the camera app, and even that subtle shifting of the eyes, I think it looks like it. The resolution of FaceTime isn't always the best anyway, with the bit rates and the pixelization, but it looks convincing, and it kind of takes that little dead-eyed look away.
Huh.
Yeah. And this is like some subtle computer vision that's just built in. And I go back to what I was saying at the beginning. If this was something that was not announced and wasn't something that was reported on, I don't think people would have noticed. I think they would just have subconsciously felt like their voice video calls were
I don't
more
think you would have
comfortable.
noticed.
Yeah. But the fact that it's pointed out now, I won't be able to unsee it.
Oh my, this is so weird.
And it makes me think, what other weird computer vision things can they do or already have done in the background to make the human-computer interaction experience more seamless?
I'm just surprised they have the processing power to make this kind of shift be seamless in a situation that's already kind of a limited framework. Because you're dealing with video already.
I think that this is where when we talk about diminishing returns on the hardware from years ago with the iPhone, probably starting with the iPhone 6 to 7, all that extra processing power that they've built into their H series chips, and they're vastly overpowered for what you need for basic functionality on a smartphone.
This is where it's
going. My fear, though, is if it's activating the IR camera array nonstop, that actually, like if anyone's tried to do portrait mode on their phone on like an iPhone 10, I'm not sure about the 10s, but on iPhone 10, if you activate portrait mode and just have it running, your phone will heat up because that does.
As it should. That should take
a lot of computational power, extra. So I wonder if you'll be able to toggle this off, or if there's something in their visual processing that just can happen at a lower level that does not need
that would be an interesting comparison, the battery usage rate on normal FaceTime versus this.
And you know what? This is exactly the kind of functionality that when you talk about planned obsolescence, it's not so much that they design the phones to die after 2 years of use or be obsolete, but they push these features that do require the computation, that do require that for the most for you to maximize that do require you to have the new phone with the extra processing power. And I say require, need, capital N need, but like in order to when these iOS 13 updates come, you're kind of forced into using them. So I'm curious if there will be a toggle or not. But that's an interesting bit of computer vision. Yeah, if it's a feature that they can do seamlessly, where else can they do this?
The seamlessly part is the critical one.
Yeah. 2 bits of Android news to move on. This one a little bit of Windows news. Windows 10, the next update coming out next week, I think, will allow finally for Android notifications to pop up in your notifications bar. So if you're an Android user and a Windows 10 user, just
do you use notifications on your Windows 10?
I hate notifications.
Yeah, I hate it on my Windows 10 too. So
yeah.
Like this makes me angrier.
Yeah. It's useful for letting me know when
something is finished
syncing. That's
like
it.
Updating or installing or a process is finished.
Yeah, but
that's it.
It's so full of junk, and it's not easy to parse out and filter the junk. I don't need to know when people's birthdays are.
Yeah, I have like Slack defaults all of its notifications in there as well, and I'm not thrilled about this. But the next one, Norm, it's fixed.
Galaxy
We've done
10?
it. We've done it.
Or the Fold.
The Galaxy Fold is fixed. They have found a way to take that film on the screen. If you remember, there was a lot of problems with the review units where people that were testing it would literally try to peel this film off the screen because it looked like that film that is just on this protective film that's on a screen.
The most satisfying part of getting a new piece of glass.
Yeah, and then the phone would stop working. Well, they fixed it by
hiding the edge of the film,
making the process so the film goes all the way to the edge of the bezel.
Now, does it recede into the bezel?
They say it does, so that it would be nearly impossible to see this film and want to pick it off. So all this tells me is that
they really haven't fixed
it. They've extended the edge of the film.
Yeah, they just made
so you won't peel it.
Yeah.
I still, I have questions. This also doesn't address all the problems we that came up with some of those review units. It's only this one with the film that was the most common.
Hey, they had booked to sell hundreds of thousands of these, and I don't think they will. The Galaxy Folds. Yeah. Well, they're making displays as well. So.
I skipped the other story. Sorry.
Yes. Samsung. Other Samsung news. August 7th. It looks like it will be the new Galaxy event. This is the Note 10 launch, presumably. So it's going to be in New York, in Brooklyn. And if you've been waiting for the next Galaxy Note, that
has a loyal base.
It totally does.
Note.
It totally does. And every time they move past the debacle of the exploding Note, every year that they have a successful Note release is better for them. But it's, the credit to Samsung to have 2 flagships, to have basically 2 big phone launches every year for 2 different segments and build a market out of that. Because even Apple doesn't do that. They have multiple size iPhones, but it's all just iPhone.
Good for them. We should mention the Tesla one before we get to the last story.
Okay.
Tesla shipped a lot of cars, more than ever before.
Yeah, I wonder how, because the reports before this, Tesla shipped 95,000 cars, which is the largest they've shipped in the quarter. But the reports leading up to their announcement was they weren't going to make this. And then you had the leaked emails of Elon Musk sending notes to Tesla employees about needing to hustle to make this. Like, is that going to be the case every quarter where they're barely? This isn't. I mean, it is a very impressive number, but clearly there's room for efficiencies in either the supply chain or in the manufacturing line, and investors rewarded them because they didn't miss their targets, and there's a ton of cars, but at some point, I worry about the quality control.
I think that's fair. We live in a bubble. Q commenters commenting on our bubble, but there's so many Teslas on the road here.
Oh God,
that it actually feels saturation is what we're hitting in terms of local owners here in the Bay Area, and so they're probably. I mean, isn't that part of the natural life cycle of these cars that we're going to start to see more issues kind of emerge with the manufacturing process? And quality control, I mean, that happens with pretty much every car. We've had very few recalls on the Tesla lines compared to other car manufacturers. Somebody can check the math on that, but it's bound to happen.
I don't think demand has fallen off. I think their challenge will be fulfillment. I think one of the biggest challenges for them, because, like you said, them making these Model 3s in Fremont, which is the vast majority of these cars being shipped off, saturating the Bay Area, it was, they were very fortunate that it turns out there's a lot of people in the Bay Area who could afford these cars and have been waiting a long time. And so the first couple quarters, the first year of its release, really, they could ramp up and deliver. But the actual rigs it takes the supply, the delivery chain, right? That operations problem is not easy, let alone overseas, but just in the Midwest, right? Like getting these cars out to places that now it's like a 2 to 3 week wait for people ordering these cars before they can get them.
Supply chain is definitely an issue. I think if we keep seeing gas prices fluctuate, they're off their highs now, but only a month or two ago, we were here in the Bay Area above $4 a gallon. Yeah. You're going to see that demand, I think, maintain.
Yeah. But also competition is going to go up. Now, of course, regardless, there's brand recognition and there's...
I think the competition's lagging still.
It will just feel like, from a marketing perspective, because especially since Tesla does not do any marketing, active marketing, it'll feel like there's more electric car saturation. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people shopping for cars, they might feel more comfortable because they have dealerships close by, because they can get a Toyota or even an Audi, right? Then they can get service, and that infrastructure outside of the Bay Area is not as robust for Tesla.
Look, I've seen more suggested ads for a fake Truckla commercial than I have for any competitor.
Have you seen these renders? Vehicle. These renders for the Tesla SUV, or not SUV, the pickup truck, the fan renders. I'm sorry, they all look like garbage. And I'm sure the true design, whatever they end up, will be even more wacky. But yeah, I don't think we are prepared right now for what that car is going to look like, and I don't think the market is prepared, and I don't know if the market will respond. Mm-hmm. All right, last bit of tech news. So it's kind of a weird piece of tech, but we're going to talk about it anyway. But Twitch. So big news happening in Twitch. They had banned one of their top streamers, Dr. Disrespect, after an incident at E3 where he violated their policies by live streaming from a bathroom. Was banned from the service and then kind of unceremoniously just kind of let back in.
Mm-hmm. He was reinstated. I think it's going to amounted to like a 2.5 week ban and then hasn't restarted his channel yet, but has indicated it will come back up early this month.
And it's kind of been dividing the Twitch streaming community. Like it puts their guidelines in kind of a gray area, and this is kind of a, it's a symptom of what a lot of platforms, streaming or VOD or otherwise, have to go through right now, because a lot of their most popular content partners, creator partners, are sometimes the most controversial, maybe because they're the most controversial. And it seems like none of these platforms want to give in. Now, there's definitely a line between, censorship and free speech, but there's also just guidelines that should be enforced or should be made more clear about this stuff. And also, there's a question of what constitutes sufficient punishment.
Mm-hmm. I have like a slightly different take. I think what this does is it exposes the incestuous relationship that these personalities have with the platform they're on. Everyone's incentive is for that personality to continue on the platform
the platform's
because the platform makes money, personality makes money, the fan base of the personality gets the content they want. They like all of that is lined up. But there's a cadence to all of these things that lead us back to the same position we started in. It feels like an Ouroboros. Like we start with the personality does something in violation, gets on, gives a apology that has some heartfelt component. We see this on YouTube more often, where it's like the kind of fake cry, like they all have the same mood music throughout. Personality like tries to emote, say they've really learned, they've listened to everyone, they're going to change.
You see this in politicians all the time.
I don't want to make this sound like this is a new thing. These non-apologies have happened throughout our history. Non-apology happens. Most people tend to accept the apology because I think humans are a forgiving bunch. Well, it's just our nature.
No. Humans are a forgetful bunch.
Well, that comes next. But I think we want to forgive. I think we want to believe in the best of people, which is great. I think that's an awesome thing. Then personality goes back to doing what the personality was doing to make money. And oftentimes in a competitive industry, that means probably doing stuff to stand out more and be more outrageous. That's their incentive. And all of a sudden they violate another policy and we're back to where we started. Platform has done nothing. Personality has done the same stuff. No one has any reason to change. And it's boring on some level. That's what this is.
Yeah, and on some level, it's also an economics question, right? It's like the reasons they do this is to make money. Mm-hmm. And the reasons they're successful in making money is because the algorithms that promote them look at engagement and look at view time indiscriminately, right? The watch time for YouTube as a metric is just, if you're watching for X number of time, for whatever reason, whether it's because you're watching kittens or whether it's because someone is ranting, that's equated the same. You will get promoted, and that will get you not necessarily the money, but that'll get you the audience, and that'll get you the audience that you can use then to make money in all sorts of ways. And so YouTube really doesn't have, and Twitch really doesn't have, they don't have control, right? Like who's at whose mercy here?
I almost kind of want the platforms, Twitch, YouTube, whatever platform, come out and just say it. Like some honesty would be refreshing. Be like, we have no incentive to ban this person.
I mean,
they will never say that. Never say that.
Let's not even talk about Twitch. Twitter has basically
Twitter has said that.
They have zero incentive to ban anyone, and yet they do in the smallest of times, the most extreme of times. But Twitter is exactly a type of service where, in the name of free speech or in the name of whatever, they will not enforce policies
unless there's a real economic penalty, either to the personality or to the platform. Things won't change. I think maybe the Logan Paul one is the only one where I felt like there was an economic penalty being weighed on the personality when he did that stupid Japanese forest thing. And that's again, because he was losing subscriber count and like partnerships were being pulled, all of a sudden he's learned, right? Like, if you don't want Dr. Disrespect to do this stuff, his viewer numbers have to go down.
But then it's bounced back right back up,
which is right
with the apology. It's the cadence of it. It's kind of built in, like you said, built into the formula.
I find it boring. I actually thought he just might not apologize at all.
He did probably. If he didn't, I don't think people. I mean, I think the reaction would be exactly the same.
Yeah, I think we've iterated nowhere.
Yeah, garbage times, garbage people. I'm sorry. All right, sorry to end on that kind of sour note, but let's have a really fun moment of science.
Time for a moment of science.
All right, moment of science meets pop culture. The trailer for Current War dropped. This looks awesome.
Wait, really?
You don't think it looks good?
I haven't seen the trailer.
Okay.
I kind of brushed this film off because it was made like 3 or 4 years ago.
Is it really that old?
It was made. It was made and shelved because of the Weinstein.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so The Current War is a movie starring Benedict Cumberbatch
as Thomas Edison,
Michael Shannon as George Westinghouse.
That's right.
Nicholas Hoult as Tesla.
Does he have the mustache?
Yes.
Come on, Bowie. Bowie kind of ended the role for everyone.
No, I think Tesla.
Okay.
I think Tesla's a big enough figure to persist. Tom Holland's in this movie as well.
Okay.
So it has a star-studded cast, and it details the history of the battle over electricity between Edison and Tesla, which is really more of a battle between the backers of Edison and George Westinghouse, who is the real backer of Tesla. I know like a lot of the history behind this. It is a fascinating tale that is not about science at all. Like there's a bit of science in there in the argument over what's better, but it is really an argument of showmanship. Because Edison and Tesla used to have these public demonstrations of their work, you know, very
electrocuting animals and
and like bizarre things like you're suggesting with the electrocutions and whatnot, and then they would lie about each other, mostly Edison lying about Tesla.
Campaign, sure.
And that stuff is fascinating. It is kind of emblematic of some of the discussion we have now in
fake news and science.
And between like science and like pseudoscience and stuff. And I think it's going to be a fascinating watch from that perspective. I have not seen the film.
Now
source material is great.
The source material is absolutely great. There are wonderful documentaries about it. And I think this is probably a story better told as in the Ken Burns documentary, where the research is done and less pace for drama. I mean, the drama is built in, like you said. I don't think I need the dramatic portrayals. I saw that in The Prestige. Like the kind of, but
I want to see the demonstrations. I want to see like the theatrics, like be transported to that moment. That's always what's been missing from the documentaries.
And then to your point about going back to the science of this and how this relates to the modern times of the fake news and the distrust in science, I think it's completely different because back then the technologies that we're working with were kind of in the realm of magic for people, right? It went to a place. It wasn't that they didn't believe science because of the rigors of it and but because it was something really people hadn't seen before.
Mm-hmm. Vaccines are magic too, Norm.
No, they're not. I'll watch the trailer.
If they kind of like temper it and not make it too sensational, this could be an awesome movie. I take it as a good sign that they're releasing it at Thanksgiving. That's usually a time when good movies come out. I wish it was probably a month later because that would mean they're really putting some Oscar potential behind it. But yeah, this was shelved for unfortunate reasons.
And the movie poster that was released for it was uninspiring, I'll say.
Given the source material? Yeah.
It was just uninspiring in general from a design perspective.
And if you learn anything from this movie, I hope you learn that Edison is a real jerk.
Oh, come on.
Just the worst.
Our listeners, I would hope, would know that Edison's a real jerk.
Worst.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go from the past into the future. We're going to talk about robotic fish. because that's clearly important future. There's a great story by Matt Simon that came out in Wired about a new study that emerged where they tried to take the idea of powering a robotic creature, but powering it in a different way. Usually when we talk about power, we talk about energy density of an object. So we'll take a big ass lithium ion battery, shove it in there, and balance sort of the weight to power ratio in order to generate movement. Well, this group took a different approach. Is what if we have a decentralized battery structure? And so they had anodes kind of spread out throughout this sort of plastic fish, and they used hydraulic technology to power its motion. So hydraulics typically is pretty simple in the context of you're using the power of a fluid to impart a force. And you can impart incredible forces. Anyone that's watching BattleBots has probably seen this on display. There's some hydraulic lifters, robots that are just doing an exceptional amount of damage. However, what they did is instead of taking a traditional hydraulic fluid, they've actually created a ionized form of the hydraulic fluid that's capable of transmitting power. It has ions in it. So when it hits the cathode electrode, it's able to deliver not the same energy density as a lithium ion battery, but a small amount of energy as well, which can power the pumps that move the hydraulic fluid around. So this has distributed energy, and they made a robotic fish that can swim using this technology. And it has, the problems are that it has 10 to 15 times as less energy density than a lithium ion battery. And so if there's a point of failure, there's no fixing the fish. It's just dead. But essentially, they're powering this object by fluid. I just think we haven't seen a design like that in a long time. There's a great video of the robot fish swimming around. It cannot swim very fast. It can swim the length of a human in about a minute.
Okay. Yeah, some fish,
so it'll probably
relative.
get eaten in the wild, but
Yep.
whatever. I loved it. Did you watch the most important moment yesterday? Surpassing the U.S. women beating England in the World Cup.
I'm aware of it. I did not watch it. I was not in Chile.
I watched the live stream. There was a total solar eclipse that passed over Chile last week, or on Tuesday, I should say. And this was interesting because it was for two reasons. From a science perspective, the best viewing spots for this eclipse were at elevated regions. So there was a lot of regions that were at like 8,000 feet. If you watch the Exploratorium or NASA live feeds, those telescopes were mounted at that height. Also, the solar activity during this time was much more minimal than what we've seen in years past. So the 2017 eclipse, which passed over North America, had a much higher solar activity. So all of a sudden, with a decreased solar activity, a higher elevation, so we're technically closer to space, we're able to see the corona of the sun a lot better, which is oftentimes what's studied during the eclipse, because all of a sudden we have shade over most of the sun. We can see the outer region, which is something like it can be 1 to 10 million degrees. It's the hottest part of the sun, kind of, against what you would expect, because it's the outer layer of the sun. Well, this is probably going to be the last time we use an eclipse to study this, because there's so many instruments pointed at it that they think the data generated from it will be able to tell us enough about the sun's corona that we won't have to use further eclipses to study things like the corona. So there should be data coming out in the next, 3 to 6 months. They're going to tell us more about the magnetic activity that sources some of the coronal activity on the sun, that I think is going to be absolutely fascinating. There's great time lapses. There's great educational materials about the eclipse. The next solar eclipse that hits the North American continent is in 2024. Oh. And it goes over a lot of cities. Okay. On the East Coast. And so book your tickets now. Yeah. I have never seen a full. Have you?
I never have been. I didn't go to Portland.
People that talk about it almost talk about it as if it's a religious experience,
yeah.
right?
I mean, you see these photos and even the videos, and like the landscape is transformed. And I think it's more when you're in a group of people, when you're in like an empty field and you have like thousands of people gathering for this, it has that same energy. right, as this big ritual.
The thing I always wanted to see, and I think that was special about this Chilean eclipse, because it happened around 4 o'clock local time, and it's on, in the southern hemisphere, it was actually close to sunset.
Yeah.
And what you get at a total eclipse is you get a 360-degree sunset happening all at once because of the blockage of the sun. And because the sun was low in the sky, apparently the sunset was spectacular. I saw a 360 view. I actually went in VR, and they had a VR rig where you could see it. It looked amazing, but there's something different about being there, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. And then it being that low allowed for some of the photos. You could see like the sun. People aren't looking like tilting their heads straight up. You're basically right above the horizon, and you have this amazing. That's what makes it look surreal. You have like this, it's like the golden hour, and then, it's completely closing.
I gotta say, I still don't totally get it. I've heard so many descriptions.
Well, we'll make plans for 2024. Yeah, the baby will be the baby will be like 4 or 5. Maybe you can go on the trip. Yeah. Okay. All right. Making plans already. Will I see a solar eclipse before I go to Galaxy's Edge?
Probably. Maybe. It'll be close.
It'll be close. It'll be close.
We're coming up on one of the most important anniversaries of our lifetime. I would say, like, this is the scientific feat I wish I was alive for the Apollo 11 landing. And being weeks away, we're seeing all sorts of stories. Probably too many stories come out. You're going to be flooded with them. My favorite one, and Norm saw this too, is what's happened at Johnson Space Center.
Yeah, they've restored the Mission Control Center, the original one, because the new one's revamped, very high tech, but the old one, the space is still there. The computers are still there. And now it's a little bit of a museum. I've been in that room. I've visited it. It feels awesome. Like you watch, I think, because Apollo 11, there's a lot of documentaries, but the fictional, like the biopics, even in First Man, you didn't see too much of MCC. So Apollo 13 was probably where you saw it the most, and that's where being in the room felt like the most connection to me. I was like, wow, this is like the most MCC for Apollo 13.
Awesome is you saw Ed Harris play this guy, Gene Kranz, famous for wearing vests all the time in Apollo 13. He was one of the leaders for all of the Apollo missions. He was in the MCC for almost every single one. I think he might not have been there for one of them. Somebody will correct me on that. But the best part about that restoration is they had Gene Kranz come by a couple days ago, and Gene in his vest in his older age, like you'd still see, like he looks like Gene Kranz. Gene Kranz is like sitting in like the chair he sat in.
Oh my gosh.
And like there's going to be so many moments like that over the next couple weeks. And this is probably going to be the last time for a lot of this kind of stuff. A lot of the people involved probably aren't going to make it to the 75th anniversary. I think you even have an Off-World coming up.
We do. Ooh, a little bit of promo. This Sunday, Nat Geo is putting out a documentary about the moon landing and about the entire Apollo program in general. And the footage they use, the perspective from the documentary is more about the media covering it, which I'm always fascinated by the kind of the ephemera of like how people were reporting on it and perceiving it. And we had Poppy Northcutt, the first woman who worked in MCC for these launches, on the podcast. So that's going to come out this Sunday as well. The episode of Off-World.
It's like you can imagine being here at Tested, like the FOMO rises up, like when Adam has like guests come in and all these like celebrities have come by, and I'll get jealous from time to time. I have not been more jealous of not meeting somebody like him by Tested.
She was awesome.
Than hearing about Poppy Northcutt coming by.
Yeah,
I almost blew my lid. It was
follows
awesome.
Me on Twitter now.
Oh, she's actually pretty delightful on Twitter. She's kind of sassy.
Yeah, I love it.
Love it.
Yep, love it. All right, last bit of a little bit of science discussion. I wanted you to be on the podcast last week talking about this, and didn't have the opportunity, so I'm gonna bring it up now. So Hugh Howey, for those of you who read science fiction, he wrote the Wool series of books in Sand, and he is, like a lot of science fiction authors, whether it's Kim Stanley Robinson or Andy Weir, very forward thinking about what is humanity's role in space exploration. How can it actually work? And tons of research is done. Well, he posted this big Twitter thread about his thoughts on just the impracticality and just not just from a technological perspective, but from a human biological perspective and of going to space in general, of colonizing the moon and colonizing Mars. And in his firm belief, he just doesn't think it will happen. He thinks we'll get there, we'll get to Mars, and we have that push to get there and be the first there. But once that happens, will we send people to Mars? Like the science fiction, this fantasy that we have about having colonies, about seeding the human race throughout the cosmos, is that something that we can imagine actually happening?
Yeah, and his point isn't so much like, will we send somebody to Mars? I think, like, reading this thread, reading between the lines, I think he thinks we will, because there is something that is explore nature, that we're going to send somebody there.
We do it just because.
The persistence of staying there is a very different thing.
Right. The motivations of doing it's built into our DNA. In our DNA, and evolution has kind of shaped our urges for exploration to be explorers because it was a biological necessity, right? To spread the human race throughout the earth, to survive.
By the way, I agree with that, and it doesn't fully explain that.
I don't think it fully explains it.
Unique about humanity and consciousness that probably is a driver.
Yes, and the curiosity more than just a survival mechanism. But those forces that compel us to go to the moon, while after we've done it, does that necessarily equate to the next step of colonization? And the analogy he makes is that we have gone to places like Antarctica, and we don't really colonize those places at all, because a place like Antarctica is far less hospitable than
it doesn't make sense to do it.
Other places on Earth. And a place like the moon, let alone Mars, is 1,000,000 times less hospitable than a place like Antarctica. The reasons we think we have to do it is overpopulation, but he argues that that's not going to be real concern.
That's not going to be a driving force here. I mean, there has to be an economic argument for it to really happen. I think almost every scholar has said, this doesn't happen based off of our curious nature. But the gut punch of this is when you start to reflect on 1969 to 2019.
Yeah, 50 years. Yeah.
And I know people have been to the moon since then, but not really. And we haven't gone back there, not because we couldn't, but I think the gut punch is we got bored of it. We did it. We conquered. Somebody climbed to the top of Mount Everest, and that's it.
Well, that's different. You saw John Oliver's story. People climb Mount Everest all the time because they want their selfies there.
Right, but that's it. I think that's his point. Is people still want to make the trek for their adventure.
Yeah.
But not to stay. Yeah. Not to be there. Not to live there. Not to grow something new there.
Yeah. Unless the urgency, and that's why so much of the science fiction stories we hear of is the urgency of global extinction. The urgency of catastrophe is what compels, humanity to really go for the stars. But that is not a problem to solve in, like we see in these books, 1 year or 5 years. That's counteracts just the what's needed to develop the technology.
I love how he holds up our boredom to our face in this thread. What I hate about this is that it doesn't acknowledge what happens when we dream big and all of the ways that life for everyone else improves when we dream that big. The race to get us out to space didn't just get us out to the moon. It changed life for everyone, or for most everyone. And I have to think getting to Mars is going to do the same thing. And I think some of the I would say almost cynicism that is embedded in this thought of impracticality. Impracticality, if we live through practical means, I think we live a boring life as a race. And I'm sure Hugh would acknowledge something like that. But I think that's what is missing from this.
Well, and he also says, he doesn't think that we'll never get humans on other planets, right? But like even the people we've talked to kind of realize that like the distance, people don't realize how big the galaxy really is and how hard it is to, aside from, right, even the idea of generation ships is kind of impractical. The more practical thing is going to be sending robots. Sending AI and robots will be kind of what gets humanity's footprint into the stars, and maybe those robots then carrying human DNA and carrying, the seeds of humanity. It won't be Star Trek. It won't be us on big ships flying around.
Starship, but I hope it's not just all practical either, because there's something not thrilling about that. And we've lost places to explore on this planet for the most part. I mean, there's places in the ocean.
I think there's so much.
There's so much to explore generally, but I think there's a vastness out there that can capture our spirit and imagination that can get us to work together in ways that we couldn't before. And talking about it and just sending robots to those places, while exceptional, it's just not ever going to be the same.
I feel like at the scale in which it's unfathomable, getting robots out there to self-replicate and getting robots out there, not in the thousands, not in the millions, but in like the tens of millions of robots out there over, like, that's a scale that I think can bring on wonder in a way that we can't fathom.
I'm not sure scale does it for me.
All right. Let's get to our last section, and it'll be relatively quick because Jeremy's not here, but let's talk some VR.
The VR Minute. Virtual reality this week.
So we're going to start off with some Valve talk. Valve Index launched last week, and there was a launch party at Valve. So Valve had its employees, invited some members of the community up to not their headquarters, but to the factory where they do some of the manufacturing in-house of their lighthouses. The assembly of the lighthouses in-house for cost reasons, for all sorts of reasons. But they did a launch there, and there's video of Gabe Newell doing a talk.
And not like secretive video. They were just get
film.
out your phones,
I think
whatever.
It feels very Valve. Film whatever. If they were afraid that something was going to come out, they wouldn't put the people there. But Gabe Newell talked about their plans, why Index is important to them, and kind of casually mentioned what that they are working on. Obviously the next steps. I think when I went up to Valve to hear them talk about Index for the very first time, they completely acknowledged that this was a very specific direction they were going in for a very high-end product, $1,000 product, based on the technologies they thought were accessible and attainable now from a supply perspective, these panels, these optics, and they were not going to do what Oculus was doing in terms of trying to reach a mainstream mass market at a lower price point, but that they do acknowledge that is something that's needed for VR. And Gabe Newell said that, they're looking next steps for Index, whatever Index becomes, they will be looking at ways to make it more affordable, the ways to make it more accessible, and even have explored ways to make it untethered. So
I think that's exciting.
Big drop. So big mic drop there. Whatever that means. I don't think it's locally processed. I do think they're going to look more at wireless streaming technologies, kind of what has been done with the Vive Wireless and TPcast. I do think high-end VR is what they're talking about, and they'll solve some of the rendering problems and the bandwidth problems. But because they're already pushing high resolution, higher refresh rates, it becomes an even tougher problem than you do.
I mean, but there seems to be so much investment if you look at what Stadia is doing around some of the latency issues that are happening, that gives you hope that there's more. It's not just Valve looking at this, like the industry as a whole is looking at this area. He really casually mentioned the untethered. He just super casually, Gabe way.
It's not a promise that it's going to be a real product, and there are obviously big technical hurdles for that to happen. But I mean, Oculus definitely seems like they're moving in a direction where it's going to be locally processed for their style of Untethered, whatever Quest 2 becomes. And I would love for Valve to take on the challenge of desktop streaming for Untethered, because they have desktop streaming, you know, throughout for Steam, for iOS, for Steam Link and that stuff. That's still wired, but all the compression is still there.
I have to say, the one thing I was like mildly disappointed about, I was surprised to hear him say more affordable. I actually I don't mind Valve being on a super high end. That may mean I don't own one of these things, but I mean, it feels like if they're iterating so hard on the hardware in this way, maybe being expensive is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and then the other thing that he mentioned is, in terms of other forward-looking technologies, is display and optics. Also casually mentioning, like, oh, display and optics are a thing they're working on for something groundbreaking. And this is where I'm truly excited, because chatting with Valve engineers and hearing some of their talks, you can find them on YouTube, some of the things that it's not just FOV, it's the quality of the image, right? Like, the panels that they're talking about are still limited by the fact that these are either LCD or OLED panels using very traditional established display technologies that don't move into the HDR field, don't move into the brightness and that's needed to really convince you of an image that is reality. And I'm really just completely speculating, crossing my fingers here, that they are looking to, the thing that's going to really be like another wow moment in VR is when we get HDR displays. Maybe not to the level of brightness that that we expect from the real world, but something that's just fundamentally different than the type of experiences we're getting. Because if I look at any light source in a VR game, it just looks like a sheet of paper.
Yeah,
it's a texture.
Like,
I want it to be blown out.
I'm comparing it to the experience of when HDR first came out on televisions, and that wasn't like the seamless process. It was multiple iterations. So I would think that's probably what it's going to be for HDR in VR as well.
Oh, and the fundamental problems that they have to solve in terms of how that brightness then also is reconciled with the lensing, right? Because they're using Fresnel lenses and combination of lenses that, while diminish some of the God rays and some of the bloom effects, like the brighter you get and the higher contrast it is, like, that's going to be tougher to avoid. So when Gabe says optics and display technologies, I'm assuming he means exploring ways for higher brightness HDR displays and also optics that can work with that, because I would love to see those benefits. Other news on the Valve side, just this week, Valve has also delivered on its promise to deliver CAD files for the Valve Index. And these are not only high resolution CAD files, but also STL files. So you can 3D print you can 3D print accessories, even for the controllers, for larger hands, for the index controllers, as well as things for the frunk, the little hole in the front of the index. And what's cool about their CAD is they also include the models for the exclusion zones, the places that you should not design any physical obstructions to block the sensors, the SteamVR Lighthouse sensors that are on the headset. So it's really cool to see what the actual viewing area and where those blind spots are, and where you can't block those. I will also point out that the community has discovered that the Valve Index controllers do have a little bit of a faulty bug on the Knuckles controllers. It's not for everyone, but it is on my controller as well, my review unit. But the thumbstick on them, while you can depress the thumbstick, if you move it to the far left or the far right, you're unable to depress the thumbstick.
Like, it physically doesn't
It does not physically, and that, I don't know, has to do with the way it's mechanically designed, the membrane underneath it, but it's not by design, because some people can and a lot of people can't. So Valve hasn't formally issued a statement on it, but people are hoping for some type of RMA. I think it goes to, the fact that they have this controller that has both thumbstick and touchpad, and a lot of people just want the thumbstick. And so the fact that it doesn't work perfectly, it doesn't have that perfect parity with a lot of the games that they've been maybe playing on the Rift side, on the touch controllers, has been slightly disappointing. Speaking of the Rift stuff, big surprise, this past week, there was an update version 1.39 of the software for Oculus dramatically improves the tracking on Rift S. I haven't done some formal A/B testing yet, but for people who play games like Pavlov and Onward, and where you do definitely need to have these controllers very close to the inside-out tracking cameras on the Rift S, they've noticed a markedly improved tracking experience.
I've seen a lot of users comment on this, so this isn't just a couple.
And this was promised by, John Carmack promised that the updates were coming, but we didn't know to what degree, and it sounds like everyone's been pretty happy. I don't know if it's going to completely replace the 3-camera setups for competition level. And there's definitely no word about any type of hybrid tracking system, which seems to be like that would be a great, if you have the USB ports and you have all that tracking technologies there, I don't know how much work would be to combine those, but for people who want to avoid occlusion, avoid blind spots, that would be the only way to completely do it. But very impressed by the fact that these updates, and I'm also curious why these weren't out at launch, because we're only a couple months out from launch. Like, how far the software stack is behind on the hardware.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about games.
Okay, games. Space Junkies, there's a big update. Episode 3, now available on Rift.
Have you played it?
I played Space Junkies, haven't played the newest update, but this is it's super fun. Space Junkies is like deathmatch in VR. Now you got bots, and this new chivalry mode, 3v3 mode, with a new weapon, bow and arrow. It's one of those games that I feel like if you had bigger saturation in terms of the player base, you would get a lot more mileage out of it. But right now, at least from my experience, not a ton of people playing. And Ubisoft did put a lot of development effort in this, but it's that chicken and egg problem with multiplayer games and for VR in general.
And Space is getting a port from Go to Quest.
That's gonna be interesting. This is. I never played End Space.
I think it was well regarded on the Go. I never played it either.
But it's a cockpit game. Mm-hmm. So it's we want more of these kind of spaceship cockpit games.
We just want more games on the Quest, frankly. So any announcement is a good announcement. And it was an announcement from a developer. We don't actually have the date, but just that a confirmation that it's going to come out.
Yeah. And then the one game at E3 I didn't get to play that I really wanted to play was from Endreams, and that's Phantom Covert Ops, and I think it just won for Game Critics Award Best VR AR game from E3.
I've been waiting for more stealth games in VR. I feel like this is a missing genre.
This is not only a stealth game, but it's a stealth game in which it's interesting movement mechanic. It's the kayaking game, so you're supposed to be kayaking under spotlights and stuff. It's very Metal Gear inspired, and I really want to play it. I think that's basically it for VR stuff. I did get a cool demo of a new control system that I'll save it for next week.
Did you play Quest Jumbotron? Did you guys talk about that last week?
I didn't. No, I know Jeremy Bug doesn't want it. It's out right now, but we gotta find some time to jump in our Quest to play.
Yeah, we haven't tried some of the Rec Room stuff in Quest. All right, well, thanks for having me, Norm. Duocast.
Yes.
Jeremy should be back next week, I believe.
Jeremy should be back. It's going to be the week before we're all out again for Smithsonian, for DC, Apollo 11th anniversary, and Comic-Con.
Norm and I will both be there.
Maybe we'll do let's do a episode of this only test at Comic-Con.
Oh, sure. We'll find there's a bunch of people down there.
Gunther's going to be there. He talked Bitcoin at Comic-Con. Maybe we'll decide.
Nothing again. Yeah. That's not about Gunther. That's about having an hour at Comic-Con about Bitcoin.
About crypto. But we'll find some interesting people to chat with at Comic-Con.
If there's things you want to see at Comic-Con or want us to cover, hit us up. Let us know.
Or if you're showing something off at Comic-Con.
Yes, even better.
TMs are open.
Oh, there's one thing I wanted to recommend that I forgot. Did you cover the Mouse Guard thing last week?
Oh, we did not.
So Mouse Guard was an incredible graphic novel developed by our friend Dave Peterson, which got opted into a film that was being produced by Fox. It's been canceled. It's probably sort of dead in the water.
Yeah.
There was from the director. They released a number of vids,
previs. They in Unreal
demo
Engine.
reels.
They basically scripted out entire scenes. Looks fantastic. It's since been pulled down, taken down.
Ooh, maybe
don't
that's a
think-
good sign.
I don't know. I don't think they were supposed to.
But I saw Dave put it out on his Twitter
Yeah.
too.
Well, the director I think was told politely to rescind.
Oh,
I
well,
don't think it's
it
an
looked
indication that it's
amazing.
coming back. But if you got a glimpse at it, yeah, they put like over a year of work into this.
Yeah, it was awesome, and just from the world building in the sizzle reel alone, it was pretty remarkable.
I'm so bummed out because like Weta was involved through the characters, the effects team that did Planet of the Apes, the War of Planet of the Apes. So all that hair stuff, all the creature stuff, they were going to do that, but at this amazing story at the scale of mice with swords, and. Gary had written the first script for it.
He actually released the script he wrote.
I think that is also taken down.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I
think
missed
it's
all this
it's
takedown stuff.
Studio IP, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
Disney did the math and for one reason or another decided.
I mean, it got caught in the merger stuff.
Yeah, they were really close to starting filming on that. And
Yeah.
it's just hugely disappointing.
One plug, since you mentioned Gary, he's revived his Twitch channel, and he's gonna be doing a live cast when Book of Eli comes out on Netflix.
It is out on Netflix. He's waiting a week for people to get a chance to watch it. I believe it's next week.
Yeah, so next week he's going to be doing a stream where everyone can simultaneously watch it. He's going to have the script up and kind of go through the movie. So if you're a fan of Gary's and the Book of Eli, it's going to be an interesting watch.
Hopefully, Twitch partner Gary Wood.
We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. I think he IRL streams in the bathroom, so we got to be careful about that guy. All right, we got an outro this week from Jesse is from Earth, and this is despite the fact that you made a sweet quiche outro before. That's how much I care about you. Maybe. Here we come.
Hi there, I didn't see you.
No, wand choosing you?
Yes. Yeah. Apparently phase 2 is actually going to involve phase 1.
The wand store. You're just taking the wand off the shelf, nicely packaged, but you're watching the short performance. No, we talked about this, right? Like, it's a small group of like 5 to 7 people, and then the whole magic happens in the room, and then the performer, the lead wizard, picks a lucky child. The wand has chosen you. Now my assistant will escort you to the checkout counter, where the parents want. Sorry, you don't get it for free. The parents want to spend $50, $100, whatever it is, to buy that wand. They choose the children of the parents who look like the biggest suckers.
Yeah.
Wohawk coming through with our theme park nightmare.
See ya.